Welcome to Highlands Talk Live. I'm Marcella Simpson, and today I'm interviewing Betsy Ross. She is a wonderful sports enthusiast, and she has been on ESPN, she has been on WLWT, and she is the peak of journalism.
Well, thank you. That's a lot to live up to. Thank you very much.
I think you do live up to it because ever since I emailed you, I have been reading all about you. I've been trying to figure out like what you've been doing, like, and it's so much. You've done so much. It's so great. And I read that on your website you decided you wanted to become a journalist at 4 years old.
Just about. It was pretty early that I knew I had a love for reading and writing. And I was very lucky in that my mother especially, but my parents always encouraged me to read, and so I just remember reading books all the time, and then, you know, that kind of leads you into being interested in writing. And when I was in 6th grade, I knew that this was what I wanted to do. Of course, when I was in 6th grade, there was no ESPN yet, so I didn't know that I was going to be able to do that. And frankly, there weren't that many women in broadcasting, much less sports broadcasting. And so, but I knew that that is what I was interested in. And I think that a lot of people, especially the way that the world is changing every day, the way that the communications world is changing every day, you can have a general interest, but there's a real good chance that what you want to do hasn't been invented yet or hasn't really been formed yet because things are changing so quickly. So I knew that I wanted to be in journalism. I knew I wanted to do something in writing. But, you know, by the time that I decided that, when I was in grade school and high school, and the time that I got out of college, the world of communications had changed so much, and we see it changing every day. So it's nice to be able to know in general what you want to do, but specifically you might not know for a while just because things change so quickly, and what you want to do may not even be out there yet.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that you read so much and now you're a sports journalist, because I still do read so much today, and now I'm here. Now I'm so interested in broadcasting and journalism, and I just love that. It's so great. I have a question here that says, describe to me one of the most difficult parts of becoming a journalist.
I think that one of the most difficult parts, and maybe it's less difficult than it is a challenge, is that you really have to look at what you want to do in the field of journalism, in the field of writing. You know, it was one of these things, again, that I was always interested in sports. And I got that from my mother. My mother and I would sit in front of the television on New Year's Day and watch bowl games. My dad would leave the house. You know, he'd go hunting. But my mom and I were the ones who sat there and watched the games, and my mother was the one who went out in the backyard and played basketball with me. So I got that from my mother. So, you know, the great thing about journalism, communications, writing, in this world is that you do have so many options. And so I think the challenge is to figure out what you want to do. You know, we have social media. We have social media stars that are developed every day. You know, do you want to go into social media? Do you want to go into sports? Do you want to go into commentary? Do you want to go into hard news? Do you want to go into features? I mean, there are so many options, which is great. And I always tell students that this is the time to dabble. This is the time to try, because you may find out that you hate feature writing, but you love hard news or you love investigating. This is the time to try it, because if you hate something one day, that no big deal. You go try something else. And so it's a challenge, I think, for so many people to decide what area, what specific venue or genre that you want to go into. But, you know, it's also exciting because you have that many options that you can choose from.
Yeah. And it's funny that you say that it's like our time to like dabble in what we want to do right now, because my film teacher, Mr. Poff, he always says that this is the time for us to fail safely.
Right.
This is the time that we can make mistakes and figure out what we want to do. And that's what it reminded me of. And also you watching baseball games with your mom, because that reminds me of me and my mom and my grandma too. She loves her sports.
Yeah.
And I've never been good at sports, but I do love watching them, because it's a great time for me and my mom and my grandma just to spend time with each other, to be with each other.
Right.
It says that you were one of ESPN's first female anchors. How did that accomplishment feel?
Well, it was empowering and it was daunting at the same time. When I went to ESPN, I joined ESPN in 1997 when they were launching ESPN News, you know, one of the many channels that ESPN has. And when I got there, there were probably 50 some odd anchors across all the platforms and all the shows that they did. There were 5 women. Among those 50 some odd anchors, there were 5 women. It was Chris McKendry, Pam Ward, Robin Roberts, Linda Cohn, and me. And you know, it was one of these things we all kind of, you know, stuck with each other. We stuck together because it was us and then all those guys. But it was really a great atmosphere. Because every resource that ESPN has is devoted to sports.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. I mean, you know, everything that they do is surrounded by every sports resource that you can find, which is, you know, when you're a sports fan, I mean, that's just heaven.
Yeah.
But it was really, I think, eye-opening, because even after all these years, there were still only 5 of us out of 50 some odd, you know, anchors. Now that number has grown, thankfully, over the last 10, 15 years since I've been gone. So it was really a great atmosphere to be able to work there at ESPN. Really enjoy covering sports, having all these resources to help you cover sports. But you know, it was something. We had our own little sorority there, all 5 of us, and so we all kind of stuck together just because of that.
Is that your book, Playing Ball with Boys? Was that where you kind of got that inspiration for that book to write
I really
about?
did. Yeah, that's a really good point. I really did, because there are so many women out there, and I always say that book came out like 10 years ago, and I said, I'm so thankful that it is so out of date now, which is great, because you know, there are so many other girls and women who have done firsts since then. You know, there was a story on the Today Show about a girl who was playing high school football and scored 2 touchdowns. You know, that's just one thing. We've seen assistant coaches that are female in the NFL. We've seen assistant coaches in baseball. We have a general manager in baseball now that is female. I mean, there's so many other firsts that women have done since that book. Thank heavens. But you know, that really was an inspiration, because I had been inspired by so many people ahead of me, like a Leslie Visser, like a Christine Brennan, who had broken down journalistic barriers so that I could do what I was doing at the time, you know, Billie Jean King. And so it was really the spark, I think, that gave me the opportunity to do a book like that, to talk to other women who had been firsts in whatever field in sports. And you know, I think I was inspired by their stories then, and I'm still inspired by their stories now, because you know, we all are on the shoulders of others who had gone before us, and I certainly have benefited from what they have done before me, so I could do what I'm doing now in sports.
Yeah, you mentioned your like all of your employees at Game Day Communications. I know not all of them are women, but I know most of them are, because they're setting an example. They're setting the example that women can be in communications, and they have a part there. And I think that's super important. How did you... What was your kind of... When did you start Game Day Communications, and what was your, like, when you kind of thought, yes, I need to do this?
This is our 20th year. We have been in
Wow.
business for 20 years. Yeah, sometimes I sit there and go, wow, 20 years. It's a bit of a cliche, but it happened, the idea really came to my head after 9/11. I was working at ESPN at 9/11. I was the only anchor in the building that morning. And so I was on the air from 9 a.m. until 4 in the afternoon. And yes, ESPN was sports outlet, but we had to cover that. I did cut-ins all day, and then later on in the afternoon, like, Major League Baseball had a news conference that we covered, and the NFL had a news conference that we covered. But we had to acknowledge the fact. And so, sitting on that desk on that day and saying the words, an apparent terrorist attack on the United States. Those were words that I thought I would never say as an anchor. And here I was on international broadcast, because we broadcasted on all of our channels. I was saying an apparent terrorist attack on the United States. And I think after that day, so many of us sat back and said, what am I doing? What am I doing? What progress am I making? What contribution am I making? Am I doing what I'm supposed to do? A lot of what people have been going through the last couple of years with COVID. A lot of people going through the pandemic saying, what am I doing? Am I living the right life? Am I living where I want to live? Can I live somewhere else? We found out that we can. So after 9/11, I said, you know what, I need to get home, because I'm from southern Indiana. I'm from Connersville, Indiana, which is 40 miles from here. My mother was in her early 80s at the time, and I knew that I needed to get back and take care of her. And so that was, I think, the impetus for me to say, you know what, I got to figure out a way to get back home to Cincinnati. And so my business partner and I had been talking for a while about, one of these days, let's do a sports PR company, because a lot of people are doing PR, a lot of people are doing sports, but nobody at the time was doing sports PR. So we said, yeah, one of these days, let's do that. Well, after 9/11 and after, kind of the shock of the day went by, and, the next weeks and months, I said, you know what, yeah, I need to get home. And so that was really the start of the company. My business partner left the Cincinnati Art Museum, I left ESPN, and we started Game Day.
That's a great story. You actually answered one of my questions on how 9/11 affected your view on media, and it affected everyone else's view, not just on media, but just on their lives. It made people rethink what they were doing. It's every once in a while, even though we don't want them, we have those moments where our eyes get opened, and it's kind of like we get woken up again.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many of my friends who were in jobs in 2019, early 2020, they have chucked the jobs, they have moved, they have absolutely pivoted to different professions, different ways of life. And it's something that, sometimes it takes that kind of an event to really get all of us to thinking about what is our purpose, and what should we be doing.
Yeah. When you started Game Day in PR, or any time in your career, did you have any doubts? Like you felt like you wouldn't get where you wanted to go?
Strangely, no. And maybe I was just naive, probably. You know, I always said that actually the foreword of my book, the dedication of my book, I said is to my parents who always told me I could do and be anything I wanted. And for some strange reason, I believed them. I believed that I could do and be anything that I wanted. And, you know, even the one thing that really sticks out in my mind, when I was going to graduate school at Notre Dame, and, you know, Notre Dame is like a little more than an hour from Chicago. So Chicago was an easy trip. Yeah. So went to Chicago, went to Old Comiskey Park to see the Chicago White Sox play. Yeah. And got there early enough, and we're sitting there, and I'm watching they were playing Kansas City, and I was watching the Kansas City broadcast team. They were doing their pregame on the field. And I'm sitting there going, I want to do that someday. What in the world put that in my head that I was going to do baseball on the field for a pregame show? But I'm sitting there going, I want to do that someday. And so every time that I am at a Cincinnati Reds game and I'm either on the field before or after the game, I think about that moment, thinking, what in the world got into my head that made me think I could do that on a baseball broadcast? And here I am doing it on a baseball broadcast. I don't know. My parents always told me I could do and be anything I wanted, and I believed them.
I think that's super important. I love the thought that nothing in your head told you that you couldn't do it. You always knew that you could do it, and you believed your parents when they told you that you could do anything.
Yeah. Now, it wasn't necessarily point A to point B.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you had to make a jog. You know, I've been kicked out of a number of press boxes and press rows, you know, because they didn't think a girl should be there. So you kind of have to maneuver your way around to figure out how you're going to do it. But, you know, if you want it, you'll do it. If you want it badly enough, you'll figure out a way to do it. You'll figure out a way to succeed.
My mom always tells me that, and somehow I don't believe her until somebody else tells me, and she'll be like, why didn't you listen to me when I said it?
You tell your mother that she's right.
Yeah, I know. She'll tell me after this. How did it feel going from a local news station, WLWT, to international ESPN?
It was a jump. But I was so familiar with ESPN. I was one of these people who had it on from 9 in the morning until whenever. I mean, I watched ESPN even before I worked there. I watched it all the time. So I felt like I knew these people. I was so familiar with them. I was so familiar with the shows. I was so familiar with what they did and how they did it that I really felt comfortable. And ESPN is one of these places that, you know, it was started by print guys. It was started by magazine editors and newspaper reporters and newspaper editors. So they had such a value on writing. And when I went up there to test for the job at ESPN News, they had me take like the night before's Sports Center script, rewrite it, and then anchor it. Because they wanted to see how your writing skills were. And that's really the only place I've ever worked that they put that much of a premium on your writing. And I know that it's easy to think, oh, it's television, you don't have to worry about writing. Oh, no, no, no. Communication is communication. Writing is writing. Good writing stands out above everything else. And if you are a good writer, you can do anything. And it doesn't have to be in broadcasting or communications or anything, because you'll probably write your kids, you know, PTA e-blast someday. You'll write a business plan. You'll write a proposal. You still need those writing skills.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that was the cool thing about ESPN. They put such a premium on your writing. And if you watch ESPN, you can listen, because they always encouraged us to kind of put our personality into our writing. And you can hear how well those shows are written, just because of that.
Yeah.
So, you know, that it doesn't matter if you do or do not go into communications, you still need those writing skills. If you're a good writer, you literally can do anything.
Yeah. And that's it's so important. It's one of our main skills to get through day to day. Even if you're not the one writing those things, you need to be able to read them. You need to be able to tell them back. You need to be able to tell people. Writing is one of our essential skills, and people don't really value how important it is until they get to that point where they have to write an email to a investor, or they have to write a book about their experience, or an essay or a thesis. And
Exactly.
that's why it's so emphasized when you're in high school, or when you're in school in general. It's just one of our most important skills.
And yes, we know that we all LOL, and we have shorthand, and we have funny spellings for, you know, words that we really do know how to spell, but we shorten them. And yeah, that's social, and that's that channel. But you don't do that in a business setting. You don't necessarily do that, you know, when you're communicating with others. So, you know, yes, shorthand has its place, but communication, good writing, it will always be in style. It will always be something that we need.
Yeah. This is my last question.
All right.
For you, well, in your words, what advice would you give to any student trying to succeed in media?
Just, first of all, get those communication, get those writing skills down. Try a little bit of everything. There are so many options that are available in media now. Like we talked about, whether it's social, whether it's print, whether it's blogging, whether it's broadcast. There are so many options. Try them all. You know, when I was in high school, or when I was in college, I knew that I was going to be an investigative reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times, period. I knew it. That's what I wanted to do. I did my student teaching back at my high school, Connersville High School, which had a setup similar to this. And they said, do you want to teach radio and television as part of my student teaching? I said, sure. How hard can it be? I'd never taken a class in radio and television, but I said, sure, I can do that. I learned more during that semester that I was student teaching, I think, than the kids did. And I learned how to edit, I learned how to shoot, I learned how to anchor, I learned all that stuff just by teaching the students there. And I thought, great, it's the last quarter of my last year of college, and I finally found something that I loved. It clicked. I would have never taken a radio and television class. I didn't take a radio and television class. But that experience in student teaching turned the light bulb on. I said, this is what I want to do. And so I went back to graduate school, and I heavied up on communication and television and writing and things like that. So I could get the experience that I didn't get in undergraduate school, so I could do this.
Yeah.
So I allowed myself to try something that I hadn't tried before. So that is probably my greatest advice. Don't be afraid to try something that you've never tried before, that's out of your comfort zone. As you said, this is the time that you can fail, and you can fail safely, and if it doesn't work, who cares? Try the next thing, because you never know when that light bulb's going to go off. You go, this is what I want to do. And it took me till my last quarter of my last year in undergraduate school to figure it out, but I figured it out. And I discovered that was what I wanted to do.
That's a great end to our talk live. And thank you all for watching. This is Betsy Ross. She is amazing. She is so sweet. And I'm Marcella Simpson, and that's the end of our show.